So today we're recording this at the very end of 2020, and we wanted to take a look at what 2021 might look like for digital products and digital services. And I think it's a great time to talk about this. I think 2021 is going to be really interesting, and we'll get into some of the detail about why and the current state of digital. But I think it's going to be a really interesting year. What's your first thoughts on that, Ollie?
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited about this talk, actually, Scott, because I think that there's going to be a lot of things we can talk about for 2021. And obviously, the landscape's kind of changed as well. If you think about something I want to go into today, if you think about 2021, maybe predicted at the beginning of the year to what 2021 is going to look like, predicted at the end of this year, it's going to be very different, obviously, due to COVID-19. But overall, I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation as to what 2021 is going to look like and the different approaches that companies are going to take with it.
Yeah, well, why don't we start there? Because I think you're right. 2020 has obviously been a year that's been pretty interesting and almost impossible for anyone to predict what was going to happen. And we've seen a lot of fallout, I guess, in terms of companies and how they've had to react to the situation. My feeling is that actually 2021 is going to be a year, even with all the risk and uncertainty involved, where for a lot of companies, it's kind of make or break, especially a lot of those companies that have been offline for a long time, and they're deciding now whether they're going to need to start offering a bit more of an online service or just move some of the services online. I think for a lot, it's going to require some sort of a bit of a leap of faith into this new world.
I completely agree. This is a question I was going to kind of ask you. Do you think 2021 is going to be a boom or a bust for digital, like in terms of technology and development? Because there's going to be two sides to this. There's going to be everyone's staying inside, so there's going to be a huge reliance on technology and a huge reliance on software. And with that, there's going to be, where it's that kind of old school supply and demand, where there's demand for the software, there's going to be the supply for it. On the other hand, there's COVID-19. So a lot of companies are also saying, do you know what, we need to cut costs at the moment. We need to start pulling back on these different projects and the investment that we're putting in, because we need to cut back on costs while this is going on. So how is it going to impact? I mean, is the digital world, the digital environment, is it going to boom, or do you think it's going to bust?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly it's going to boom in my mind. I think a lot of companies will struggle still, and I think actually that's where we're going to see a lot of struggle. And you're right, there are a lot of companies out there now kind of reining back their expectations, I think, in projects. But at the same time, just more generally, I think that there's going to be a whole lot more innovation, and we've seen that over the last year, where there's just been a whole change in landscape and a whole change in circumstances, and it's driven a lot of people and companies to be really innovative in their approach, in the way that they reach their customers and in the way that they deliver their services. And I think that's going to continue, I would imagine, throughout 2021, just with, again, the uncertainty and the difference in landscape now being involved.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there will be a boom. Personally, there was a lot of predictions around different software booming in 2021 and then continuing to boom within the 2020s, for instance. And I think that if anything, it's just going to force that software development through now, because people are going to be so much more reliant on it. Where there is demand, there isn't going to be that funding cut, if you will, for different projects. I think, unfortunately, there will be certain areas within the market, like retail, that will take a massive hit and we'll have to sort of postpone. But I think within software, for instance, and digital, right now, it's the only environment that people can use to communicate through and to use for their daily lives, if you will. So because of that, I think that there will be a massive boom. And I think it's quite exciting as well, because I think we're going to see a lot of technology push forward, maybe a couple of years. And I think there's going to be different technologies just pulled forward, just because there's a lot of people out there who is going to demand it. If you look about, I don't know, a classic case of augmented reality. I mean, it's not really used at the moment, but right now people need it for just that personal communication, that personal touch, just to have something a bit different than their daily lives and their home living space and stuff like that. So they're going to need something just to delve into. It's a bit like gaming as well. Like gaming is a huge boom at the moment. If you think about how PlayStation has just performed in the market, where unfortunately we are seeing the whole scalper situation where they're buying all the pieces of stock, but there's such demand for it because even a higher increase in demand for it because people at home need something to escape from their daily lives of just looking at four walls. I think that's going to be the same case with software.
Yeah, I think you're right. The innovation, I think, is a real interesting thing to follow right now because, like you say, there's been so much change in that space. But it's also been good just to see some of the offline companies, like you said, retail is one of those spaces that's been really impacted, especially the high street stores. And I think that's always going to negatively impact them. But there's been a lot more companies as well that's just in this past year use maybe not that innovative in their approach, but just use some services to bring themselves online and start delivering to their customers. And over time, increased competition in that space, new players to the market, that's all going to help. It's just been really good to see more variety and more opportunity to do stuff online.
Yeah, absolutely. It is exciting. And the key word you've just said there is innovation as well. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of in the next couple of years. Let's not pretend that COVID's just going to disappear this year. It's not. And we're going to see the ramifications of it this year. I don't know particularly, I can't predict the market. I don't know particularly how it's going to look, but I can tell you that it's definitely going to have an impact. Whether it's a good impact or a bad impact on the digital world is something to be seen. I personally think, like I've just said, I think it's going to be a boom. Scott, I think you think it's also going to be a boom as well. I don't see why it wouldn't be because of the demand. There will be a massive demand for it, but I don't know. We'll see, really.
Yeah, it's hard to know, isn't it? I think changes either way are going to be coming for sure. That's the one thing we probably can predict. Nothing's going to stay as it has done for the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of brings me on to another question. Now, we touched on gaming, and there's obviously this new form of not developing, but delivering gaming, if you will, with things like Google Stadia. I know Amazon have their own platform. I think Amazon Games now. I think Microsoft obviously bring out their own. PlayStation have brought out their own. Do you see there being an increased demand for online gaming going forward into 2021?
Personally, I'm not too sure. I mean, it's not my area of expertise really, but I would imagine so. I mean, with more people being at home and less likely to play with their friends. I think the other thing as well is, I mean, there's all these new technologies like 5G that are probably going to help in that space. You mentioned Stadia, which is obviously delivered over the cloud, and 5G is going to massively help those sort of platforms. I would imagine so. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm 50-50. I think there's a huge demand for gaming at the moment. And the reason why I know gaming isn't something that we usually touch on, but I think in the background of gaming, there's going to be a massive push for games developers this year. I read an article the other day that said that, there's been more of a demand for gaming this year than there has been for gaming in a long time. So for any developers who want to kind of move into that space, I think there's definitely going to be the jobs there. Again, I keep going back to it, but it's all about supply and demand, and the demand is there at the moment more than ever. I read something like, I think it's like 50% of the world's population play games now, like video games, which is mental. But, it's a cheap option to anybody who can't afford to pay that initial £450 for the next gen console, or the plus 1,500 quid for the gaming computers that you need nowadays, which immediately go out of date very, very quickly. So, if you look at the average lifespan of, say, a PlayStation, which is 5 years, the average lifespan of a gaming PC, for a gaming PC to be at its highest level, probably about a year before it goes out of date. And then you need to start updating it and stuff like that. So I think online gaming and these like gaming cloud solutions, I think personally could become very popular. I think it's a make or break situation depending on network as well. Within the UK at the moment, we have a great network because we're so close together. One of the perks of being such a small country, I think we're the size of California, aren't we? So our network is brilliant. We've got, like you said, 5G is coming out now, fiber optics almost everywhere. So, I don't think there's not many places unless you go right out into the country where you can't get 200 meg fiber optic broadband. So I think that the UK is probably going to be a place where this could boom. I can imagine the States and bigger countries where they've got a broader network, they might struggle a bit more. Definitely in the UK, big cities and the UK, I think, could actually really boom with gaming. And then with that, you'll see, you see a new era of gaming, and I think that also it'll provide loads more jobs in that digital industry. There's going to be more like sort of the marketing jobs, and there's going to be more of the delivery. This is then going more into your area, Scott, about how you could actually deliver that much more easily. That sort of there's a lot of data that needs to be used to actually run a game from a cloud. How can you do that effectively? And I think this is where cloud specialists will come in, and cloud developers will come in very, very handy. And this is where we might see a boom in jobs within the digital industry.
Yeah, I would imagine so. It's just getting more complex like everything else, isn't it, in the tech space? And the other thing as well, you talked there about how there are new ways to reach, I guess, consumers with games. And I think the other thing as well is that we're starting to see more of an uptake now in games being used by companies to, I guess, either educate or teach people, especially if you think about the target market of a lot of companies, and target market's changing now to where a lot of people have grown up games and use games on a daily basis, especially the younger audience. And actually they can be a great way to get your message. Sounds bad, because I think actually a lot of the better games are more on the educational side, but to get something across to people in a real way that they are ready to pick it up. And I think a lot of that media is probably going to start being used over the next couple of years as a way to get a message across, and to really teach people something, whatever that is about your brand. So
absolutely. And it's getting that engagement. It's getting that engagement piece with your consumers in the moment, especially within the learning industry. We're seeing that gamification is very, very effective for that. Multimedia types is also very, very effective with that as well. Like the day of e-learning, I think, has gone out the window now. Learning has become more of a marketing role. Anybody who's within learning can tell you that as well. It's all about how you can market that message, like you said. And it's not all about just delivering words on a page and people to read it. It's about getting that learner to engage with that. And I think that this is perfectly blended with that gamification approach, is that people have now grown up with gaming. Can those games be more complex? That gamification that you use to deliver learning, can it now be more complex because people are used to playing the games? Whereas beforehand, there was an era where people didn't grow up with games. So it was more board games. So it'd have to be tailored around that. And don't get me wrong, you also have to build a solution that's going to be right for everybody. So there is going to be that older generation. We're not quite there yet, where the older generation were playing games in their youth and stuff like that. So you still have to tailor it. But I think going forward, especially into 2021, that we could see an increased complexity to gaming within learning. I think going forward, if we go out of this subject of what 2021 is going to look like and what we're going to say what 2030 is going to look like, I think we could see some really complex builds around learning and gamification, and that perfect mold. And it has proved to be really effective. I think there's also the idea of trending as well there. I mean, it'd be great while it's new that everybody does gamification and learning and it's engaging, but sooner or later it's creating that mindset that people want to learn. And if there's a negative mindset and you're throwing gamification at that, negativity is going to put negativity on that sort of mindset of gaming, and that'll go out of trend. And then all of a sudden people be like, oh, where's the old school words? So you go back to e-learning again, and it swings and roundabouts. Like vinyls, for instance. You remember, like, everybody couldn't wait for an MP3, and then as soon as MP3s came in, everyone was like, oh yeah, do you remember vinyls? They were great. And then they boomed for like a year, and it's gone back to I don't know, we'll probably have tapes again soon. But it'll just get boring, really, and people will get bored of it. But I do think that I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but I do think that gamification will definitely be a big part of 2021 going forward, especially with the learning.
Yeah, I actually think learning as a whole is another piece that's going to really get some attention over the next year or two. We're seeing Industry 4.0 really take hold now, and probably especially over the past year, where now more and more jobs are moving into the online space, and out of kind of traditional manufacturing and those sort of roles. And to be, I think we're going to have to see a more focused effort on learning in that space to really help to transition people to new roles. And I think, like you say, gaming could be a really good core part of helping to deliver that. But I think equally, like you say, that the learning space has really been pretty stagnant for a while. There's obviously been quite a lot of focus over the past several years on things like social learning and other pieces. But I would imagine that learning is probably going to continue to be quite a big part of the strategy of many companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that there's actually been a massive investment in learning from companies within the last year, especially with COVID-19, where everything shut down. People saw it as a prime opportunity, especially the bigger companies, to focus on learning and developing their learning. There was actually a boom for learning jobs during COVID-19, where there was a regression for loads of other jobs. And there's always been that technology and been that desire to build that better solution in the background. I've gone to a lot of learning technology conferences before as well, where you go out to the Adobe stalls, for instance, and they've got all these VR capabilities, and they've got this next gen sort of software that can do everything for you. You have all these new authoring tools, you have all these new learning experience platforms that can do everything for you. Got the AI behind it. The problem is that they're pitching to primarily teachers. The closest thing you have to maybe a developer is an instructional designer that goes to those technology conferences, and instructional designers are nowhere near developers, and they can't understand maybe how to implement those, so they need the tools to actually create those solutions for them. And I think that now we're starting to see the tools are coming up to speed where they're easy enough to use that all people can kind of use them, and now they can produce that sort of next level content. So I think there's been a lot of investment into the learning industry, and it's going to actually allow that delivery of the right solution, and use that kind of that next level software and that next level technology to deliver that solution. And it's all about that marketing again. It's using that multimedia technology. So there's video now, podcasts, all sorts that people are exploiting to deliver and get the learner engaged.
Yeah, and to kind of expand on that, obviously in your world where you deliver training and learning materials, obviously you deal with, I guess, quite a wide variety of content and the media to deliver them. Have you seen the trend that's started to shift towards video 100%. And other things like that 100%. Lately?
If I look in the last 5 years, at the beginning of the 5 years, it was very much throw out bog standard e-learning for every single project. We just found that it's just not engaging enough. I remember we did a test at the company I was working at the time. We did a test and we evaluated, and we sent out a certain amount of questions that basically said, how many of you actually read the e-learning? How many of you find it engaging? How many of you just click through? Because let's be honest, a lot of people just get that e-learning, and if it has the option of clicking through, no one's going to read it. The worrying thing was the staggering 95% came back, said that they don't even read it. 75% admitted to just clicking through. And we could see that from the completion times as well. Like a 10-minute to 15-minute course was being completed in 1 minute, 52 seconds. Now, there's no way that you can take in that much information. So it's not a failure on their part. It's a failure on the designer's part for not creating engaging learning, So I think that's where it was taken back to the drawing board. And from an industry standard at that point as well, this is where I started to see a lot of other companies also take it back to the drawing board and go, actually, what's the best solution here? What's the right solution here? And this is when we start going to learning technology conferences, and all of a sudden I start seeing a massive boom in learning experience platforms, which is amazing. AI behind it, virtual reality. It was almost like it came out of nowhere. Augmented reality. It was there, but people just started talking about it more. And that's when it picked up a lot of steam. And I think that for me, like 2016, 2017 is where I really started to see like video being used. I really started seeing like podcasts being used, that learning experience platform to create engagement. I think that is the future of learning personally. And I think 2021, we're going to move away from that sort of traditional learning management system, just pushing out and delivering learning to that learning experience platform that's going to allow the learner to engage with the platform and learn in their own way. And that's all you can ask for really in the end of the day. If you need to deliver learning, what's right for that person? How's that person going to best engage? I mean, for me, if I went through school and I got to learn through YouTube, I would have done a lot better. Personally, I think I would have done a lot better learning through YouTube than someone giving me a textbook and learning from a textbook. Now, don't be wrong, it's not always the right solution, but it's all about what's right for that learner, for that individual learner, and giving them the option and giving them and empowering them to use that. And I think that that's what we're going to see going forward is that learning experience approach.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I think the one thing you've really highlighted there as well is the fact that a lot of companies seem to be taking design and UX a lot more seriously now and actually stepping back from problems, which obviously is critical. And thankfully is almost more normal than not now. And I would imagine that's going to become really important over the next year or two, as it becomes, it's almost, I've heard it called before, the last real differentiator between companies and experiences now is the focus on design and UX. And
Definitely.
almost the delivery of it is something that can be, I'd say, but almost commoditized in a way.
And do you know what I've seen really boost that as well, Scott? Is design thinking. And I think that that's really boosted that approach of that initial thought and innovation before actually delivering a solution. Now, if we look back, and this is for any digital project, I'm not just talking about learning. If we look back 5 years ago, that standard waterfall approach, a project department or an area would approach you, say within a standard business, or another business would approach you and say, we've got this, we want this, we want you to build this. There would be no real thought in the initial delivery of the solution, maybe a tiny bit, but it would be more of a discussion of what do we need?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Instead of actually, let's go out there, let's go through the empathize to test phase and try and actually deliver a decent solution. It was more about, well, what do we need? And they'll be like, well, we need an app. Why do we need an app? Because everyone else has got an app. Okay, yeah. Let's build an app then. That was almost the innovation and the thinking behind any sort of piece of software development. And then all of a sudden there was all this like development going on. And even though there was direction, there was still no real direction because there was just loads of ideas being thrown in at the development stage.
Yeah.
And then you've got like a solution that kind of works because it's got 30 or 40 different ideas all bubbling around at the same time, kind of half working with each other. Then you'd always go through that phase of then, well, we'll have to delay delivery because the solution isn't actually working and it's not going to be working on time. So delivery got delayed again, because there was no real thought and no planning up front. And I think that this is where this is exactly something I've seen change in the last couple of years as well. That sort of design thinking has been introduced and all of a sudden projects are being delivered properly and on time. And it's just about having that initial planning up. It's being more, let's be honest, it's being more organized up front, really, isn't it? Like if we take design thinking back to its basics, it's just organization and planning up front, and it's doing it properly. It's saying, right, let's not jump in, let's not jump the gun, let's not jump in and just start developing something straight away. Let's think about what we're going to do. Let's have a little process around it. Okay, we've got this idea. Is it working? No. Okay, let's take it back to the first stage. We haven't wasted that much time on it. Let's keep it going until we find the right solution, and just giving yourself time to actually come to that solution as well. And I think this is where design thinking is really come in handy. And I think this is probably, I still feel it's being implemented into loads of different businesses. Everybody knows about it, but people are still half in, half out. You still have that culture around a lot of business where people are still trying to, especially with change managers. Sorry if there's any change managers listening to this, but where they want a solution just to be built. And it's about, I think a lot more people are now starting to take on, a lot more companies start to take on this design thinking approach.
Yeah, Agile hasn't really helped either, and I think that was a big step in trying to help some of this. And obviously, design thinking is almost Agile in its own way. Waterfall didn't really hit the mark in terms of identifying what the real solution was, first of all. And I think Agile was a step towards that, but it's just been so misunderstood and misimplemented in a lot of companies that they still miss that. And I think a lot of the time people conflate or jump over the kind of whole research and the proof of concept stage, just jump straight into developing something. And too often, even though it's a core part of Agile, the testing phase and the getting feedback and putting that back into the start of the process again just doesn't happen, really, at least until it's too late and you've got a big product that's in the market already. And like you say, the whole product itself might have been completely the wrong way to go, first of all. So I think what we banned within our company and our industry is a discovery phase. That's like a really important thing to do for any project really at this point, especially over 2021, where we're going to see a lot more companies jumping into digital products and digital services for the first time and moving a lot of big shifts online. It's going to be really key to make sure that people aim for the right thing, basically, I think, rather than just follow suit with everyone else in the industry.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's really important to have that initial stage. Again, like you just said, just to reiterate, just to find that right solution.
Yeah.
A lot of companies go forward and, like I said before, jump the gun, and it just doesn't work. And you come out with a solution that you spent loads and loads of money on, and it's not right and it's not delivering the results that you want. I've seen so many projects being canned as well, just millions of pounds being spent on projects and they just get canned. and it's because it's not been right, because the solution's not right, and it hasn't. Also found again that people are reactive, so they're trying to build something for the now and not for the future.
Yeah.
And I think this is where design thinking is really going to become prominent. It's picking up a lot of steam, especially within the software industry, within the design industry as well, obviously. And it's picking up a lot of steam, and people are using it all over now. So I think that in 2021, especially, it's probably going to be the standard way to work, alongside, parallel with Agile. I mean, obviously, Agile is the big word on everybody's tongue at the moment. Everybody has to work in an Agile way. I don't still think that a lot of companies, especially within the software industry, actually understand what real Agile is. Everyone has their own take on it, but it's the approach that I've seen is more from a blended approach of Waterfall and Agile, whereas I think software companies might actually start going into an actual tailored version for software and development, a sort of tailored Agile way of working going forward in 2021 and onwards. Because at the moment, it's, like I said, it's that blended approach, and it doesn't quite work from my experience.
It's difficult to know when you start that out, though, isn't it? Because I think a lot of companies hear Agile and it sounds like the problem to it sounds like the solution to all of their problems. But in a lot of cases, it really depends on what they're doing and how their team is set up and what their culture is like of how they implement it. And like we've already said, a lot jump into iteratively developing things, which is a great thing in itself, and it's definitely a step forward, but still miss that whole piece at the start around really spending some time investigating what's out there and how to best solve the problem, or what even the problem is to some degree, and what the pain points of the customer are, everything else that goes into that. That still needs its own phase a lot of the time, whether it be for a product that you're developing or a new process, or even just some improvements to an existing product. That's a really useful thing to still do. And then equally on the back of that, there are lots of quite cheap and easy ways to get real feedback from users, and that can be as early as in the concept stage when you're prototyping, but getting that feedback is equally as critical, and folding that in. And when you've got those two pieces, iterating on a product can really be like super effective. But if you miss those stages, you almost just end up doing waterfall in small chunks, which just doesn't
absolutely
really work.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what it is. It's waterfall in small chunks. It's people saying, let's make scrum meetings of a waterfall project.
Yeah, and they break a project down at the start into like 20 sprints, and then and still deliver it as if without any feedback from the whole process, and we'll carry on down that cadence. It's just
exactly. And I think people need to just admit that sometimes Agile doesn't work for every project. Waterfall does work for some projects, and you do need it. That you don't need to move away from Waterfall just because it's not trending. And again, it's all about these trending, even project management methodologies. That's what's trending at the moment is Agile. The word Agile is trending everywhere. Doesn't always mean it's right, but I do think, again, 2021, huge boom for Agile. Agile's booming already, but I think it's going to be like the standard process for every single company. Everybody's going to be, I want to be Agile. I want to be Agile. We want to work in an Agile way, even though we don't understand it. So maybe there'll be more understanding around Agile, but definitely for 2021, it's going to be the a continuation of the keyword within project management methodology.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I know we spoke about like kind of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google earlier around their cloud gaming, but as cloud providers, do you think they're still going to be like the lead market providers for their cloud software? Or do you think there's going to be an emergence of other companies now within 2021? Because obviously it's becoming more and more popular, and they do dominate the market. They do. But do you think there's now going to be, maybe with development of software and technology and stuff like that, do you think there's going to be other companies challenging as a cloud service provider?
From my experience, I think that the big players will still continue to be the big players and the forerunners in that race. What I do think will be quite interesting is all of the tools and frameworks that surround it. And we've seen a lot of companies in that space over the past year or two where they almost abstract away a lot of the complexity of some of those providers, because the getting into cloud software is complex. And especially when you're jumping into a provider like Amazon, there's not just a case of moving your software to the cloud. It's learning a whole new ecosystem of different products. And the problem with the pricing there as well, because it's so hard to predict and so hard to calculate ahead of time, without a real good understanding of what's happening and which products to use in that space, it's hard to get the right value for money, and pretty quickly costs can run away if you're not careful. So it's definitely worth having some expertise in that space when you're diving into the world. But what we are seeing more and more is tools and frameworks and other types of software that basically add a layer on top of the cloud providers, or work alongside the cloud provider products to basically make it easier to do things with. A lot of developer tools in that space are a good example, where you don't necessarily have to deal with the end products on the cloud itself, but you end up dealing with just a high level version of software that makes it much easier to deploy changes or whatever. Basically, I think that will continue to innovate. I just think that the big players, they've got so much investment in them in terms of their money and their output, and equally there's a lot of competition between them. You know, if you think about how far they've come in the past 5 years, the difference between, and really we've got kind of 3 or 4 now very similar platforms in terms of what they offer, but the way they've all grown is just phenomenal over the past few years because of the amount of competition between themselves.
The thing that I can see happening, and I'm not just talking about with cloud technology, I'm talking about with different types of technology now, especially within the digital world. And it's going back to, it's kind of blending that cloud and COVID discussion together. I think COVID might have forced companies to move out of one area and work in another. So let's take, for example, Dixon's. Now, anybody in America who's listening to this, or in any other country, Dixon's was primarily what do you call it, Scott? Like a technology, like a generated technology providing retail store. So, you know, it provided computers, Wi-Fi,
generally high street, weren't they?
It went, you know, it started going bust. It was losing a lot of money. So what it did is it changed its approach and moved to being a travel store within airports. So a lot of times now, if you go to an airport within the UK, all around the world, actually, you'll see a Dixon's that's providing some sort of technology. So you might have heard Dixon's actually, because they are in all F's, but they're now just a travel store. My thinking behind why I think that there might be a challenge for a lot of software now, where the big 3 have always dominated, is because a lot of these other bigger companies might not be doing too well in, say, their retail space, or I don't know, engineering space, whatever. They might be a huge company, but they're not doing too well. Let's take, for instance, Tesco. I'm not saying they're not doing well, they're probably doing very well. But if they weren't doing well in the market, they've got a big enough financial backing that they think, do you know what, we need to invest into somewhere else. And I think that this is where we might see these kind of big companies thinking, okay, let's pull out of retail, for instance, and let's push into another area. And this is where I think you might start seeing these big 3 being challenged, not on cloud bases, for instance, but it could be challenged there on you know, with their cloud service provider, as a cloud service provider, but they could also be challenged in other areas of digital. And I think that this is where we might start seeing that. You know, maybe Amazon and eBay are 2 of the biggest online providers, aren't they, of retail providers?
Yeah.
But we might see other like retail companies put all their money into being just an online retail provider and having the backing to do it as well. And I'm just thinking, you know, going back to those cloud providers, that we might start seeing other companies challenging because they need to develop with, and they need to start making money, and they might actually see that this is an opportunity and room for investment. So for me, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I think it's a very high possibility that we might actually start seeing the big 3 being challenged by some serious players.
Yeah, I think it's such the difficulty with cloud is that ultimately the companies providing those services need the resources to do it. They need server space ultimately.
Yeah,
and I think you're right though. It's not it wouldn't take too much to leap from. So GitHub, for example, is a very, very well known developer platform where basically it evolved from people just storing code, and it's evolved to take up more of the development process now, where you can manage the life cycle of a project. It wouldn't be too much of a leap to imagine them, for example, diversifying slightly and becoming more of a hosting platform, and that is a bit of a leap, but it wouldn't be too much of a shock to see that sort of approach, like you say, with a company moving into a slightly new area, especially if they capitalize on something that's already one of their strengths, which is a place where people come to deliver software. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of companies do really well. Like you say, with the Dixon's example, the travel store makes perfect sense because it's electronics that people need at the time they need it. And when they see that wasn't working for high street, they move into a more focused area. So yeah, I think there's certainly going to be a lot of innovation in that area. I think, and obviously more and more people are moving to the cloud every day and seeing the benefits of that. So it's obviously just going to heat up competition in that space, and we should see some really exciting stuff come out, I think.
Yeah, I think we will, to be honest with you.
So one of the things I want to ask you, Ollie, was we see a lot of technology like VR, AR, AI, all of those sort of buzzwords. And for the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a tremendous lot of excitement around them, and this whole thing of they're coming right around the corner. Where do you see them going in 2021, sorry, or even any of that sort of technology?
Glad you asked this, because I was going to ask you the same question. I've read up a lot on this. They think it's going to be the future. I personally don't think it will be. I think it's a massive trend at the moment, VR, but from what I've heard, a lot of people have issues with actual VR itself. If they can get over the motion sickness that people generally feel when they use it, it could blow up. Personally, they seem to think that in 2021, it's going to increase by like 80% in usage. But at the moment, good VR headsets are still way too expensive. I don't see that price coming down at all. Like, don't get me wrong, Oculus Rift used to be 900 quid, and I think it's now down to like 350. And it's amazing, but it's also impractical as well. Like, you need to have an open space to use proper VR. You need to have an open space, so you need to have an open room. So you need to dedicate a room to it. You need to put up 4 sensors in each of the room. That room pretty much needs to be empty, and then you can walk around it now and you can kind of use VR. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that's going into ideal VR, and that's not creating that VR experience that we're all seeing at the moment, but that's where they want to go with it. So within 2021, yes, I think it's going to increase usage. Yes, I think that I think 80% is a bit of a push in terms of an increase, because I think that still the headsets are way too expensive. And let's be honest, like the Google Cardboard headsets are just not good enough. I think the headsets generally need to be designed in a much more advanced way. I mean, for instance, you have a lot of people who need to wear contacts or glasses. And I got a rugby ball shaped eye or whatever, so it means that my lenses have to be thicker on one side so I can see better.
Yeah.
Especially, and I find that when I used to use VR, when I first started using VR, I get a lot of double vision. It would never change, so it was kind of pointless for me. And I think that there's a lot of people that wear glasses, a lot of people that need to wear contacts, etc. So it's just not going to work for them. So personally, everybody's talking about this massive boom. I think that yes, it will work at a high level. Like, for instance, we can still see those standard VR, or we'll still have those standard VR experiences. Like, you'll just sit on your chair, you can look around, there's stuff going on around you. It's great. You look at something and a little pop-up will come up. Brilliant for learning. If it doesn't make people sick. But going forward, there's this whole idea of VR is going to be real. You'll be able to walk around in this kind of virtual world, and you'll be able to interact with other people, etc. I think it's just going to be way too much motion sickness if you're sat down in a chair moving around with VR, and then if you're walking around, there's only a limited amount of space. Augmented reality, on the other hand, yes, I think that could be a big thing. I do think that is the next. I think VR might not be successful, but I think augmented reality will be massively successful, especially within gaming. I know we're going back to that, but I think gaming is like going to be the next phase for augmented reality. But generally as well, for learning, augmented reality will be amazing. For social activities, augmented reality will be brilliant as well. So I think that there's big excitement around augmented reality. I just don't think that VR is going to take off like everybody think it will.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we've seen enough demos and everything else of VR, and even attempts. I mean, like you say, gaming's been an area where a lot of companies have spent some big money and some big pushing big games out in that area, but it's just not been adopted to the level that it was promised to be. I think you're right, though. AR has got a lot of use cases, I think, especially for companies delivering experiences to people. I think that could be really interesting. I think the problem is as well is that even though a lot of us have actually access to AR, augmented reality, pretty easily through our phones and everything else these days, people just aren't used to reaching for it.
No,
and
I know.
I think part of the reason for that is we haven't really seen the kind of killer app for AR at the moment.
Well, you say that, but Pokemon Go is kind of an AR app,
Yeah, true.
and that was massive, and people engaged with it, but I don't think people knew what it was.
Yeah. And that's the thing. People aren't up to date enough about
Yeah,
what
yeah,
AR is really at the moment. And,
yeah.
and like, yeah, maybe reaching for it is the wrong term, but they just aren't used to using it day to day. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg, isn't it? You need the apps to come, but you also need people to use the apps and be willing to use them for them to be used. So,
and you need the right technology as well. Like, it's all well and good having AR on a phone, but people just think about it as an app. If you actually had glasses or like goggles like VR that AR could use, that, you know, specifically for AR, and creates that sort of environment, it'd be very, very different. But
it's the infrastructure, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's the technology's not there at the moment. I don't think it will be there in 2021, especially with COVID and people being stuck inside. I don't think that there's going to be a massive demand for it so much. I think there's still going to be the classic demand for apps, etc., web apps and whatever. Maybe more of a communications platforms, etc., like that. But I don't think there's going to be a huge push for VR and AR yet. But I do think that if I was to choose one, augmented reality is going to be the way forward. I just don't see how VR is realistic, personally. Yeah. And like you said, too many people, there's been a massive investment in it, but it just doesn't work. Whereas AR can blend reality, actual reality with augmented reality. Do you know what I mean? It blends the two perfectly well. So you don't have to have that.
Yeah. It needs to be easy, doesn't it, for it to become anything other than just tech enthusiasts or early adopters picking it up. And it really does have to be quite simple for people to use. And like you say, the infrastructure has to be there and the tools have to be there and just be part of our lives to be able to really see that.
Exactly. I don't think the tech's there for virtual reality. I don't think it's there. I always imagine virtual reality to be exactly how have you seen the film Ready Player One? I don't know if anybody has, but that's when, before I ever even knew about that film, that's all how I imagine virtual reality would work, because I don't understand how a person can move within a virtual world unless they're using joysticks, in which case it doesn't feel, you're not really immersed in that virtual world. So all you're doing is just looking around at a 3D picture, or you're looking around within a 3D space, a virtual 3D space. That's it. You don't have real control. And so it's limited then. So for me, it's kind of a bit pointless, and you may as well just go with the augmented reality approach, which would be that perfect. It's almost that like perfect compromise, if you will. Yeah,
a lot of the experience, well, a lot of the things we've seen on VR today have almost been kind of 3D experiences rather than any type of reality, isn't it? And I think virtual reality really does have to have that type of immersion that we're just not seeing at the moment, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing that they're still like investing in it though. Like PlayStation really are trying to. I think what PlayStation did is they invested so much money in it. It wasn't popular. They tried to lower the prices. No one bought it still. They're still producing games for it. And I think they've just kind of said, you know what? We've invested in it now. Let's just keep producing games for it. And then we'll slowly like push it out to the back corner until people like just forget about it. And then they one day go, do you remember PlayStation actually released some VR stuff once? But no, if you look at it now, VR was massive when it first came out. Samsung did headsets on it. Google did headsets on it. And now all of a sudden, Samsung's not really doing headsets on it anymore. Google really aren't doing headsets. You know, you can buy a car, you can apply for a free cardboard one if you wanted. But yeah, I just don't think the technology's there yet. And it won't be for a while.
I agree. Cool. Well, that's been a really good overview into what 2021 is likely to bring, I think. A lot of uncertainty, if anything else, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And hopefully some innovation with that as well. Yeah, that's great. And thanks everyone for joining us as always. We'll catch you in the next one. If you like the podcast, we'd love it if you could review it on iTunes, or please tell a friend. That really helps us. And yeah, thanks so much. We'll see you soon.
Cool. Thanks, guys.